we're celebrating Advent. And guys, just so you know, that was the first time that my wife ever has lit an Advent candle. And I thought she did a really good job for her first time, I thought. Yeah, right? I thought she would have done this a lot more times. I will say in our house, it is not the first time that she has lit a candle. We have all of them, like every single one that Yankee Candle has ever made, I think, is in our house. And so there are many times where I walk in and I'm just allergic to my home. But that's been cool. And so she did a great job. She got that done. And today I want to talk about kind of not just Advent and not just candles. I want to talk about the light that they represent. See, today across the world, there will be millions, literally millions upon millions of people that will light candles for Advent. They will light these candles for Advent. And we're going to start our Advent series here, this All is Bright idea. And these candles, they represent something that's really deep. Now, we could talk about what they represent, each one of them. And just so you know, there are 3 purple candles. There's a pink candle. Then there's this middle candle, which is called the Christ candle. And you kind of light one each week as you get ready for this. Some of you have grown up with this for a long time. Each one of them in different traditions represents different things. Some traditions would say that they are hope and they are joy and they are peace and they are love. And there's the Christ candle. Actually, what's weird for some reason is you light 2 purple candles first, then you light a pink candle, then you come back to a purple candle, and then you light the Christ candle. Because why wouldn't we make it more difficult? There's just all kinds of things behind this. And maybe for you, like candles, maybe when you think about candles, like you think about other celebrations. Maybe you think about your birthday cake. Which I don't know if you remember, there was a quaint time where we used to put candles on birthday cakes and then we'd blow them out. That, I think, is over. Some of us are not sad about that, honestly, being over, because it was weird that people spit on your food before they gave it to you. That was not a great time in our existence anyways, probably, but that was part of it, right? You had people who would do that. You would put candles on your cake. That was a part of it. Maybe candles represent other things. Maybe at your wedding, you had a unity candle. Anybody do the unity candle? Where you would have 2 flames, and maybe it would be the mothers of the bride would come, and they would light that candle together. And in the background, somebody would be singing Eternal Flame by the Bangles, and it was beautiful. Is this burning an eternal flame? And they had like that moment. Maybe you had that going on with your candles. I mean, you have these different things. What we don't know is we don't know all the tradition of the Advent candles, actually. We don't know what each candle represents. Every tradition is different. There are different things that they represent. There's different times, different places where candles represent different things. But I will say this. The one thing we all know about candles being lit inside of Advent is that they represent the light of the world coming into the darkness. Everybody can agree on that part. Every tradition respects that. Everybody understands a light of the world coming into darkness. Now, I would challenge, and I would just question, if you've ever thought about this, why is this such a strong metaphor at Christmas time? We see it all over the place, don't we? There's lights, there's candles, there's stars, right? We see stars become a big thing at Christmas time. There's the Christmas star. In fact, if you're not paying attention right now, on December 21st, have you seen this? That there's going to be the Christmas star that hasn't happened for 800 years, where Jupiter and Saturn are going to be so close to each other, about a tenth of a degree separate from one each other, that they will create a Christmas star. Again, has not happened for 800 years. They said that the last time it happened, that they believe that there was too much cloud cover for people to understand or see it, which I imagine 2020 will do the same to us. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Like, it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and then it just, there's going to be something that happens, and we won't be able to see it. There's going to be, like, smog or something. So it'll be a big letdown. But that's what's supposed to happen on the 21st. A star we haven't seen for 800 years. It's called the Christmas star. There's things like that we celebrate, the Christmas star. Again, all this light and the darkness conversation. We see this all over the place. And today what I want to do is I want us to just kind of create a framework and a little bit of a foundation of what we're going to be talking about in this series. So this series, we're going to talk about light coming into the darkness. This is a huge theme through the Bible. This is a huge theme in not just the Bible, in our lives. We see these phrases, this understanding. If you talk to somebody who you talk to them about having a dark time, you know what they're talking about. You know what that means. If things feel light, you know what that feels like, right? Whether it's a burden that literally feels light or it is something that is bright. You know what these two terms mean. We see these all the time. They are spiritual terms, but they are emotional terms. They are even physical terms that we use to define a lot of things. And for some reason at Christmas, they all kind of come alive. And what I want to do today is just kind of build this foundation and this framework of kind of what this looks like in the biblical terms as well as what it means for us. Like what this means today, just on a brief, like on a very small scale, what this means in the framework that the entire Bible is building for this light coming into the darkness. Because this isn't just with Jesus. It doesn't just start 2,000 years ago. This starts about 6,000 years ago when we first start to see the understanding of what light and dark is written down to represent. And that's where I want to go today, what I want us to understand. So if you have a Bible, I want you to start. We're gonna hop around just a bit, but where I want to start today is this beautiful prophecy that we see in the book of Isaiah. As Joyce read on the screen a little bit ago, as she read in the Advent reading, Isaiah is one of the greatest books of prophecy for Jesus. If you are looking for something to read during the Advent season to understand the coming of Jesus and what that meant, read Isaiah, because the whole thing is just littered with this beautiful imagery of what it's going to be like when this Savior comes. In Isaiah 9, if you flip to Isaiah 9, you're going to see this beautiful symbolism that's going to happen. Okay, so Isaiah 9, verse 2 says this. It says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Again, for you, maybe you don't think of this as an Advent verse. Maybe you don't think of this as something that you would read and think about Advent. For me, my family, my sister did get to light Advent candles. We were we were kind of a big deal in our family. And we got to light the Advent candle one year. And I remember my sister, so we went to this big church. It was all just wood beams, wood frame. It was beautiful. And they had that burgundy carpet that every church in the 70s and 80s had. You know the one I'm talking? Yeah, you know the one I'm talking about. And then the pews matched it. They were also burgundy, a matching burgundy, because the Spirit moved better if you had matching pews and carpet. And so they had like this whole big, every pew was wooden, had the burgundy between. It was really, really a beautiful church. I remember my sister walking down the middle aisle of that church because she was coming down to light the Advent candle. And she was carrying a candle in her hand, and then at the front there was a thing kind of like this, a wreath that was just kind of stationed right there in the front of the room. And she came down, and her shoes, my mom had bought her new shoes because she's lighting the Advent candle. And this is a big deal. My wife tried to leverage this week. You know, I'm going to light the Advent candle, probably need new shoes. This is what you do. So my sister, she had these new, patent leather, really nice shoes that were too big because she was at that age where she hadn't quite finished growing. Parents, you know what I'm talking about. You're like, I'm not buying the size that they are. I'm going to buy the size they will be. And so my mom had stuffed tissues down into the shoe, like down into the toe, kind of like if you were to buy the shoes and have that tissue paper that's all crinkled up in there. Like she almost just didn't take it out. Like she just left it in there and was like, shove your foot in there, kid. Deal with it, right? So my sister's walking down the aisle, and the shoes are starting to slip, and they're starting to kind of fall off, and she's getting very uncomfortable. Everybody's watching her. Our church was a few hundred people. It was a little bit bigger, and everybody's watching her walk down the aisle with the candles to come and light more candles, and she's very nervous, and wax is starting to drip, and her shoes are starting to slip. And so when she gets to the front, she grabs the table where the candles are seated, where these candles are sitting, and she starts to lean on it to fix her shoe. But as she's leaning on it, she starts to pull the little tablecloth that's on the table, and the candles start slipping towards the end of the table. They start coming toward her, but she's not paying attention because she's got shoes that do not fit her well because her mother doesn't love her enough. And so she's trying to fix her shoe while pulling the candles toward her, and you could feel the oxygen in the room just get sucked out as everybody in the room, you guys know who you are, especially moms, you know the gaspers. You know the gaspers I'm talking about where, man, you know what I'm talking about, right? Where you're just driving like a human who drives, who's driven before, who's been driving since you were 16, and then all of a sudden your wife just does this, and you're like, what happened? Oh no, what happened? And you're like, and it turns out nothing happened. They just noticed that you were driving. And they gasped. That kind of gasp happened through the entire room. Everybody gasping collectively because they were so afraid that this light, these candles were about to hit the floor, that everything was about to burn. The burgundy was going to burn. The wood was going to burn. The building was going to burn. They were so worried about what would happen if that light hit the floor. Now, let me just say, this is what this verse is trying to represent here. If this light, if a real light, a great light, as it says in this verse, if that great light was to really come down to earth, if that great light was to really meet the darkness, everything would change. Everything would change. Isaiah is writing to a group of people who are in a massive displacement. So when Isaiah is writing, he's writing to the Hebrew people who have been conquered yet again. They are now in Babylonian captivity. They have been conquered. They have been taken into a new civilization where they don't know the language. They don't know the customs. They don't know where they're at. They are fully displaced. They are fully disappointed by the moment they're in. This is not what they hoped for. This is not what they wanted. And they are fully in despair because of what they've been brought into. Isaiah is writing to this group of people saying, this is what's going to happen to us. We are going into a captivity. We are going into essentially a slavery. We're going into a time where we're going to be displaced, where we're going to be disappointed, where we are going to live in despair. Just realize that that's coming. And he's writing to them. He's saying, there is a darkness. I realize there's a darkness, but in the midst of that darkness, the people walking in darkness, they have seen a great light. And if that light was to show up, it would change everything. Everything would change. If that light really came down, if that was really true, it would change everything. Now, here's what I want to do just for a second. What I want us to do is I want us to break this up, like I said earlier. I want us to break this up. I want to look at this in the biblical sense, not like the biblical sense, like they laid together in the biblical sense. I want us to look at it as like the biblical sense of what this is talking about, what this verse means. And then on the other side, I will try to get to what this means for us personally today. And we will get there in a little bit. Let me talk about why Isaiah is writing, because to understand what Isaiah is writing, he's not just writing to the future, he's writing to the past. He's writing backwards to the Hebrew people, saying, let's look back at our history. Let's remind ourselves of what has happened. He's trying to call on other sources to get us to a more preferable future, okay? And so what he's writing here is not just an isolated event or an insulated event. This is something that goes far back, and he's trying to draw on that. So what he says is, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. In fact, the land, what he says after that, when he says those living in the land of deep darkness, that phrase, by the way, in Hebrew, where it says the land of deep darkness, is actually the same exact words that David uses if you know the 23rd Psalm, where he says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That's what those words are. Same exact words. The land of deep darkness is the exact same words as the valley of the shadow of death. Those walking through that deep, deep darkness, what do they need? They need a great light. And so he actually is hearkening back to the Genesis story here. So what we're going to do, just real quickly, if you have your Bible, flip over. You can keep your finger there at Isaiah 9, but flip back to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, this is the very first thing we see. This is why this is such a big deal, is because what he's calling back to is Genesis chapter 1. And for us, I think it's really important for us to understand why light and Christmas are synonymous with one another. Notice this, very beginning of the Bible, very first verse. If you don't know where to find Genesis 1, again, it's page 1. It's like literally page 1. You just go there. It says this, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now notice this in verse 2. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. We've talked about this verse before. There's a Trinity effect in here. We'll talk about that probably later in this series when we talk about Mary a little bit more. But this moment right here, notice what it says. The earth was formless, and it was dark. There was an eternal darkness. The earth was not naturally a bright place. Right? The earth by itself, right now, if we were to take the sun away, would the earth be a bright place or a dark place? It is naturally a dark place, right? And so there is a darkness that is eternal. Just as Isaiah is writing to a group of people who are living in an eternal darkness, believing that they are living in an assumption of darkness, that they are living in an atmosphere of darkness. They are living in this place where they believe they will never see a light at the end of the tunnel. That's the same thing we see in Genesis. That there is an earth that itself is in the assumption of darkness, that in itself is in this atmosphere of darkness, that in itself is in a place where it will never see a light at the end of the tunnel unless something changes. Unless something comes along, unless a great light comes along, this earth will forever be dark. Right? You see that? But then, verse 3, and God said, let there be light. God's first words, first command in the entire Bible, the first time God speaks, God says, let there be light. And there was light. Now, I'm sure God said it with a really cool, like Morgan Freeman type voice. But he says, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning on the first day. Now, real quick, let's talk about this for just a quick second, because for me, this gives me hope when I read this. If you ever notice in Genesis chapter 1, we've talked about this before, but if you notice, in the Hebrew understanding, notice what comes first. In our minds, the first thing that comes in the day is the morning. You start in the morning, and the day ends in the evening, right? That's how days work for us. In the Hebrew understanding, this is the opposite. Notice what it says right here. It says, there was evening and there was morning the first day. This is why to this day, Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah, these celebrations begin at sundown, because that's when the day begins in the Hebrew understanding, is at sundown. It actually is believed that what you should start your week with, by the way, is rest. That's where you start your day and your week, is you actually start with rest, because your day begins at sundown, then you rest, then you move into the rest of the day. Just like what we see in the creation story when God creates man, the first day he spends with man is a day of rest with God, and then he moves into doing work with them. Does that make sense? So that's where the day starts. It actually starts in the evening. There was evening and there was morning the first day. Now, the word evening here is a word that means like finality. There's a finality to evening. It is when it is over. And some would say that what God is doing here, there are scholars that believe that what God is doing here, the beautiful thing about this is the evening and the day is trying to claim something. It's trying to say darkness is the way it is. But God steps in and God says, no, I'll tell you when it's over. I'll make the boundaries here. I'll be the one in charge of making sure that we know when there is light and when there is dark. I'll be the one who speaks into that darkness. I will not let it end this way. It ends when I say it's over. And so God speaks and he brings light. I hope that makes sense, because I think in all of our lives there are moments where it feels like we are in this eternal darkness, where it feels like we're under this atmosphere where it's never going to get better. We are under this at least impression that this is the way it's always going to be. But God says, no, I'll tell you when it's over. And he speaks and he brings light. So God speaks, he brings light. There was evening, there was morning the first day. In fact, this light that we're talking about here is actually referenced. So remember in Isaiah, it said there would be a great light. The first time we see that great word that is the great light is actually right here in Genesis chapter 1. If you skip down just a few verses, verse 16, it says, and God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky and separate the day from the night. Let them serve as signs to mark sacred items and times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. Notice verse 16. God made two great lights. That's the same exact words we see in Isaiah chapter 9. My belief is he's trying to point to this light that has been created, that God has brought a great light into remarkable darkness. This is the biblical precedence for this. Now remember, after this, what happens after this great light is we start to see in Exodus, God shows up as fire. Remember this? He's a pillar of fire. When there's a mountain meeting between him and Moses, he shows up as fire there. Even into Chronicles, when he comes into the temple, he comes in as fire. God shows up as light over and over and over again. God is light. This is what Isaiah is talking about. This is what he's trying to point us to, is this light. If we go back to Isaiah 9, we see this again. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Now let's talk about this for us personally, what this means. This light, this hearkening back to the beginning of time where God separated the light from the darkness. What does that mean for us? And how can we apply that? And what does that mean for us today? Now, my opinion is there's a lot of ways we could go with this, but this moment right here seems to speak something really deep to me, at least. Because I don't know if you feel as though in the last few months, there has just been this atmosphere of darkness. There's just been this atmosphere around us. The hard part is I think there's also been an assumption of darkness. I think we have naturally become more pessimistic about the surroundings that we have. And for many of us, it feels like there is just no light at the end of the tunnel. And we have been holding our breath as long as we can to wait for the light at the end of the tunnel. But there are times, if we're being honest with ourselves, where we are done, where we are tired of trying to hold our breath and wait for this light to enter into the darkness. When we lived in Virginia Beach, and we were right on the coast, and there was this spot where what had happened in the coast there was they realized that there was not a way to trade and have like a road running between the top part of Virginia and the south part of Virginia, and so they had to create a bridge to come down and cross across the water. Now the bridge was a bridge, kind of like what you would see with the Skyway Bridge, a big, long bridge. But then they had ships coming in and out, and instead of deciding to build a bridge that would go over the ships, they decided to build a bridge that went under the ships. And I remember our first trip out on this bridge, and it goes way out into the water. You're going about 7,000 feet out into the water. Then when you get out there, then all of a sudden this tunnel starts to show up. And you just start going like down into the water, like under the water, in your car, in a tunnel. It's cool. It's not scary, and it's totally safe, I'm sure. And you go under this water. You actually go about 60 feet under the water in your car, in a tube with a bunch of other cars. I don't know who engineers these things. I'm sure they're smart. I hope they are, because it is terrifying. Because you do have this realization when you get down into this tunnel that this could be it. I don't know how watertight this is. I don't know how strong this thing is, but it's very scary. There are actually people that go into this tunnel and they try to hold their breath all the way through. That's anybody else do this in their tunnels where you have to hold your breath? Yeah. There have actually been people recently that have actually died from trying to hold their breath the whole way through the tunnel. I don't know why this is that important in your life that you have to prove it to somebody no, I can totally hold my breath that long. And you actually lose your life from it. But it's that long of a tunnel. And I remember watching as we would go down and down and down. And when you're going down into this tunnel, the hard part is there is no light at the end of the tunnel. Because the light is on the way up. You don't see it on the way down. And as you continue to dive down deeper and deeper and deeper, sometimes it just feels like there is this atmosphere, there is this assumption that things are always going to be this dark. You don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And for some people, you're holding your breath, you're waiting for this light to come, and you just don't believe that it will. You just don't believe that it can happen. And that's the group that Isaiah is writing to. This group that has been not just disappointed, not just displaced, not just in despair, but a group that has given up hope that there will ever be a light at the end of the tunnel. And they're holding their breath as long as they can. And friends, for a lot of us, we've been making calls recently here in the church, like our elders, our staff. Hopefully you've gotten phone calls from us just seeing how you're doing, just checking in on people. And let me just say, I don't mean this to be a huge downer. I really don't. But let me just say, as we've been doing that calling of just seeing how people are doing, as I've been meeting with people, as our staff's been meeting with people, as our elders have been meeting with people, what we realize is that there has not been, I have not talked to anybody in this season, anybody, who, if you're like, so how have the last 10 months been? That they're like, okay. I haven't talked to anybody with that attitude. Almost every single person we talk to can tell you about something that has happened in their life that has made them feel displaced, that has made them feel disappointed, that has even made them feel despair. I mean, just the amount of, and I'll just say it, like the amount of deaths alone that we have dealt with, not necessarily just from this virus, but the way that we are not able to grieve in the normal ways, the way that people die, or the way that we have to do our mourning processes from a distance. It is hard. It is so hard. The people that are dealing with health issues are one thing, but the people dealing with mental issues are on a whole nother level. I really believe that physically in the next couple of years we will see ourselves come out of this time and out of this season and away from this virus. I also believe in the next couple of years we will see our, not physical health, but our mental health decline more than ever before. Because so many of us right now, we are displaced. We are displaced. I will talk about this more in January when we get to this, but I just want to say right now, I think this time, I wish we would not have called it social distancing. I hate that term. I do believe that we should have some kind of distancing if that's what's keeping us safe. That's good. But social distancing is not what we need. We need physical distancing. There is a huge difference between those two things. And right now, we think that we're supposed to be socially distant. I would say the opposite is true. We may need to be physically distanced, but we need social interaction almost more than we've ever needed it. If you are a follower of Jesus, you hopefully understand this at this point, that you are wired and built, and you are just your natural DNA, your wiring patterns are built to be in community with other people. It doesn't matter if that is in person or an online gathering. It does not mean if that's over the phone or FaceTime or if it is in person. At this point, I would say anything is better than nothing. Don't let great be the enemy of good on this. Get around people. You need people. I need people. We need people. That's how we are wired. And we might need to be physically distant. We do not need to be socially distant during this time. And so many people are living in isolation, like literal isolation. Let me just tell you, if you are not a part of like a small group, a community group, or a group of people that you trust, that you have friendship with, whatever that is, you need to be a part of it. You just need to be. I don't know how you're getting through this time without being a part of it. I don't know. I really can't figure that out. It cannot be good for us. So many of us are displaced in that. And so when I call people, I literally talk to people personally. I have talked to people within our church community that are at home, they are isolated, and when they talk to me, it's almost like they are so surprised to be talking to another human again. You know what I'm talking about? I recently saw a guy the other day, and I was talking to him, and we were having a conversation. And just being honest, like this is probably overstepping on my part, but we were talking, and we've been friends for a long time, and we were both masked up. We were near each other. We were talking, and I literally just like reached to touch his shoulder to say goodbye, just like, hey, see you later. And as I did it, he flinched, like he jumped, and he goes, I'm so sorry. I don't know what just happened. He's like, it's been so long since I've been around somebody. It makes me very nervous about what we're coming into, not just for our, my generation above, for the generation below us, what that will look like as we start to make cliques instead of community. And I'm not saying that you need to be next to each other or on top of each other, breathing on each other, whatever. I'm just saying you need to be a part of some kind of community. We have some that meet over Zoom. We have many that meet over Zoom right now. And it's still, I'm not saying it's perfect. It's not my favorite solution, but it is better than nothing. I can guarantee you that. We can still have honest conversation. We can still grieve with each other, mourn with each other, celebrate with one another over our, we'll call it a phygital space, physical and digital space. We can make that work. For most of us, I would say that displacement is a huge thing right now. That's why over Giving Tuesday this last week, that's why we're starting this whole mental health thing. We've partnered with Gary Wood, who's here in our church. He is a licensed mental health counselor. And again, I believe that this pandemic of mental health will far outlive our pandemic of physical health. And we are openly and actively trying to, as a church, do our best that we can to support people who need mental health care in this time. Because I think, honestly, if we're being honest, I think all of us need mental health care after this. But I do want to make sure that people have affordable and accessible mental health care in this season as we come out of this. And so we're partnering with Gary. We'll have more details on that in the new year because we're really excited about that part of things. Because for me, it seems like one of the biggest needs I've seen. Some of us are living in a place of disappointment. Maybe it's not displacement that you're dealing with. Maybe it's just disappointment. If we're being honest, every single one of us, disappointment happens. Let me just explain it real quickly. In my mind, disappointment happens anytime that your experience does not meet your expectation. So you set an expectation, this is what you're expecting to happen, this is what it's going to be like, and then your experience is less than that expectation. I can't say with any certainty in your life, but I would be pretty confident that all of us have experienced an experience who has been less than our expectation during the season, right? We all had plans and goals and dreams and even just like normal ideas where you wanted to put candles on your birthday cake, and suddenly everything has changed, right? And that disappointment is hard to deal with. We are all living in that right now. Maybe it's just despair. Again, many of us are grieving, mourning, whether it's loss of life, loss of jobs, loss of opportunities. Many of us are mourning that. For me, I mourn some of the things my kids don't get to do right now that I'm like, I got to do that when I was a kid. And they are losing years of their life to this, right? Like opportunities they could have. Maybe you're experiencing that right now. Either way, what I would say is all of us are in a land of darkness. All of us are living in the land of darkness at some level. And the beauty of Advent, the beauty of Christmas, let me just say this. I don't think that some of us need maybe counseling as bad, or maybe we don't need community as bad, or whatever you think it is. But I will say you probably need Christmas this year. Because what Christmas represents is the opportunity to remind yourself that there has been a great darkness, but there is also a great light. And that while we might place our hope in things that will disappoint, while we might place our hope in things that might just fall short, while we might put our hope in things that will even lead to despair, many of us can put our hope into a great light. And we are those that are walking in darkness, but we have seen a great light. Some of us have been holding our breath for that great light so long. Some of us have been just feeling that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But we have to remind ourselves there is a God who says that I get the final word. And before evening comes, I'm going to speak and say, no, let there be light. In your life, in my life, he's going to speak and say, let there be light. When we read this passage, this is why, when we look at this through our simple lens of understanding this is why if you flip over to John chapter 5, if you flip over to John chapter 1, verse 5. If you're in John chapter 1, if you flip over there, this is why John writes the way he does. And we will get deeper into this John passage later on in the series because it is rich. But when John writes the very first chapter of his book, he writes a manifesto on who Jesus is, and he actually goes all the way back to the creation story as well, and he is hearkening back to what we see in the very beginning of the Bible and the beginning of creation. But what he says here in John chapter 1, sorry, I should have marked this off. Notice these words that he says in verse starting in verse 5, we'll get to verse 5. Let's read the beginning. In the beginning was the Word. Again, we'll talk about this later. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made. And that has been made. This is about Jesus right here. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. Verse 5, that light, the light of Jesus, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Some of us need that light right now. And the beautiful thing about Christmas, and what I hope you realize about this Advent season, is not that it happened, but that it happens. That every single year we remind ourselves, we light candles, we put up the lights, we celebrate the star. Why? Because there is light in the darkness. And every single year we need this reminder, maybe this year more than ever, that there is still a light in the darkness. There is still a God who speaks. There is still a light at the end of the tunnel. And right now we have to hope and put our belief in that light. A few weeks ago, my family, we made a brave journey to a place called Disney World, and it was like when nobody was allowed in, and it was really cool because it was kind of like a ghost town, and it was like us and the staff, like that was like it in the whole Disney, and it was great. It was the most magical thing we've done actually there. And guys, there weren't all the crowds. Again, some things about COVID, you're like, oh, no, it wasn't all bad. And there was just not as many people, and you could just kind of get around and do your own thing. And in the Magic Kingdom, there is this ride that I do not care for. It's called Space Mountain. Anybody been on this ride? Don't love it. Okay, yeah, I don't love it. And it's not because I'm scared of the ride itself. Here's the problem, guys. I have arms that are roughly the length of most orangutans' arms. Like they're not proportionate to my body. We did a thing one time. That's why my sleeves are always rolled up, by the way, is like because I can't get them to go all the way down. They just don't go. Like I one time went to a tailor and was like, I need a shirt that reaches my sleeve length and fits my collar. And the person literally laughed at me. And I was like, where do I find those? And they were like, you don't, brother. You just don't. And if I was to be, you know how your wingspan's supposed to be your height? If that was true, I would be roughly 7.5 feet tall. So I got that going for me. And so my arms are just really long. And on Space Mountain, I don't know if you know this or not, but there are these parts, because it's dark in there, the whole thing is dark, there are parts where I get very nervous. I like to put my hands up on rides. And I get very nervous that if I put my hands up, they're going to get chopped off. Because there's lots of tracks and things going around, and I'm like, I'm going to put my hands up, and I guarantee I'm going to lose a hand. Now, there's part of you, I know some of you right now are like, ooh, but you could win a good lawsuit with Disney. You're what's wrong with America? But that is what some of you are thinking. And so I never want to go on the ride because I always feel a little bit claustrophobic. It feels a little bit small. It feels a little bit close. But this last time we went over there, they didn't have Space Mountain open. It wasn't open. And we were on this little people mover, you know, little people mover thing where you just kind of go around in a big circle. It's not an exciting ride at all, but for parents, it's the best ride in the park because you're like, we just get to sit down. This is the best ride. I love this, right? We're just sitting here, just sitting. And so we're sitting there going around, and as you're on the people mover, it passes you through Space Mountain. And usually you get to see Space Mountain in all of its darkness and all the speed and all the things going around really, really fast. But as we passed through, it would happen to be a day where they were not using Space Mountain. It was closed down because of the COVID things. And the lights were on. All the lights inside of Space Mountain were on. And we could see the whole ride. And guys, let me tell you, it's not that scary. There's a lot more breathing room in there. There's a lot more space in there. There's a lot more room in that than we thought. And why do we know this? How do we see that it's not as bad as we thought? How do we see that we're not as fearful as we were? How do we see that maybe the moment we're in is not as bad as we once thought it was? How do we see that? Is because there was light. When we bring light into our darkness, it shines on everything, and we see what's really going on, the good and the bad. We see what's really happening around us, and maybe for some of us, we would see that we can have a lot more hope in this season because there's a light in the darkness. Maybe for some of us, we would see this isn't as bad as we thought. It's not as scary as we once thought because there's light in this darkness. Maybe for some of us, we would start to understand that if we could just turn on this light, this great light that has existed since the beginning of time, and let it shine into the darkness around us. If you're not a part of a community during this time, I would encourage you to be. If you're not close with Jesus during this time, I would encourage you to be. If you're not spending time on a daily basis in some kind of devotion or prayer or some kind of time where you find for yourself in this season, I would encourage you to be, because we need the reminder every single day that we have been walking in darkness, but that there is a great light. So as we celebrate this Advent season together, I hope that you'll be part of this. I hope you'll show up for Christmas Eve. It's going to be a beautiful time. But as we walk through this Advent season together, what I want you to know is that there is a great light. We're going to take that apart even more. We're going to get into that even more over the next few weeks. But I encourage you to join an Honest Advent group, join a group of people who are meeting together and talking about this, or find a way that on your own you are doing Advent-type devotionals to make sure that you are in this understanding that there is a hope, there is a light, that this isn't just all no light at the end of the tunnel. There is a light at the end of the tunnel for those of us that have been holding our breath for so long and waiting for so long. There is a light at the end of this tunnel. If you would, let's stand together. We're going to sing about this light. But before we do, let me pray for you, and let's pray together. Father, I thank you so much for this season. I thank you for what it means to each one of us. I thank you for what it means for us collectively too. And Jesus, as we think about this season, as we think about you being this light that has come into the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome you. As we think about what that means for each one of us, and for each one of us, the darkness we're walking through, would you help us to be honest about the things that we're dealing with? Whether it's disappointment, whether it's displacement, whether it's discouragement, whatever it might be, I pray that you would help us to walk through that with you, knowing full well that you are still a light in the darkness. That as we walk as people who have walked through a lot of darkness, that you are still walking with us and that you are shining a great light. And for some of us who feel like we can't hold our breath anymore, we can't get to the end of this tunnel, I pray that you would remind us that that's what Christmas is about, is a reminder that you have shown into the darkness and you still will show into the darkness. Today I pray that you would be just real in our lives. I pray that we would have honest conversation with one another. We would be honest with what we're dealing with, that you would help us to be pulled back into community from places that might feel far from it right now. You would help us to be pulled back into these conversations with people that we love, because so many things I think we're keeping on our own and trying to hold on to so dearly. I pray that you would remind us that you are good and you have placed us around people who love us. I pray that you would help us to remember how important community is during this time. I pray you would remind us what it feels like to walk in light and not in darkness. We love you so much, and we thank you for being the literal light of the world. Even today. Not just 2,000 years ago, but even today. Praise things in your name. Amen.
Bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name still, call the sea to still, the rage in me to still every wave. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, breathe, call these bones to live, call these lungs to sing once again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness
so thankful that you joined us this morning. As Kevin shared, he talked a lot about us needing community in this season. And so we hope that you will take a step towards community, even this week. I would love to hear from you, would love to chat about that. I know in my life, one of the ways that Jesus brings light into darkness is with other people, right? When I share something that's going on and I bring that to community, when I bring it to people that I can trust, and in a vulnerable moment say, hey, this is what's going on, that often is how Jesus brings the light into the darkness for me. And so we want to invite you to be a part of that with us. We've got Honest Advent groups going all through the week, some on Zoom, some in person, for men, women. We would love to get you connected. So come talk to me today or send me an email or text. We'd love to hear from you. But we would love to help you get plugged into that. We hope you have a great week, and I really hope I get to see you at Publix for Pack the Pantry anytime from 4 to 7 on Saturday at the Mitchell Ranch Publix. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a great week.